Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Toffee Blues, your source for all things Everton, and welcome to another scout report. Today, it's going to be a scout report on Adam Aznou, who's expected to join from Bayern Munich any day now. And we're joined here by Rory. Rory, thank you for coming on the channel.
Pleasure. Happy to be here.
So, just to get into things, some notes I've got here is he moved to Bayern in 2022 from Barcelona, has only actually played 4 games for Bayern, and then joined Real Valladolid on loan in February, playing 13 games. The reports came out last week linking Asno to Everton, came kind of out of nowhere, and it seemed to, within a space of a few hours, go from a rumour to a deal being agreed with Bayern. So tell us, who exactly is Adam Aznou? And because naturally a lot of Everton fans don't know much about him.
Yeah, not a surprise really. Obviously, a player that is still very young in his career. Yeah, a player that as Bundesliga, fanatics know a little bit about, but not an awful lot. So obviously, with my background doing Bundesliga content, yeah, obviously there's loads of players that we're really familiar with and could kind of talk about for hours on end. Asnu is probably not one of those. So obviously, I've done a bit more digging into him as a player in the last few days to come on and join you and kind of talk about him a bit. But as you've already mentioned, yeah, a player that comes out of the Barcelona famous academy, La Masia, is never a bad start. Yeah, obviously a Spanish background, although he now represents the Morocco national team. I think so. Obviously, the background to that is early on. He was at La Masia at the same time with Lamine Yamal, so not a bad player to be paired up with. Yeah, highly sought after, great skilled player. Obviously playing down the left hand side as a fullback or sometimes as a winger. They weren't able to agree on a contract extension whilst he was in Spain, and so Bayern took the opportunity to pounce quite quickly and get a deal done to bring him into the setup. He, as a player, made quite a lot of good strides in the next couple of years after that. So I think he signed in 2022, and then worked his way through the Bayern youth setups quite well, impressing and improving his game as time went along. To then eventually work his way into the first team squad and get a professional contract signed. Obviously, a contract that only runs now until summer of 2026. So currently, obviously, just a year left on his contract. But yeah, left back by trade, but can do a job down the left wing. Obviously, just turned 19. He's got some great credentials, so I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. And as you've rightly said, he's had a quick loan spell back in Spain. Season just gone, so limited first team exposure. But yeah, we can talk a little bit more about that as we go on.
Yeah, so you mentioned he's gone through his time through the Bayern youth setup, not really got much of a shine in the first team. Naturally, he's only really just got his first big loan out, and naturally playing for the team that finished bottom of La Liga, even if you impress, you're not going to get into the starting 11 at Bayern very easily, considering, one of the best institutes in the world. From what you have seen from him, what would you say his strengths and weaknesses are as a player?
So obviously his first team exposure is very limited. So there's not a huge amount to go off in terms of being able to really study him, season on season. From what I have seen briefly and what I've read about the player, strengths very much like most modern day fullbacks, getting forward, very comfortable attacking, getting to the final third and having that composure. He's known to have a good range of passing, so being accurate crosses or passes and linking up quite well. Yeah, with his winger, if he's playing with a winger in front of him. I guess a player comparison that you might say that Everton fans and alike would know more about is maybe Rafa Guerreiro, who's obviously who's at Bayern right now. A player that's in front of him. So yeah, plenty of strengths for the player to develop and work on. Obviously, at 19, there's a physical element to it, which obviously we can talk about as weaknesses. But yeah, great promise, and one of those players that just fits into most systems. He's also been known to be able to come into the midfield and again, like most modern day fullbacks, that I've seen a bit of a trend these days is slotting to centre midfield and help out those systems where it just creates that extra man in midfield and can create an extra passing lane, then free up the winger down the left hand side as well. So yeah, plenty of strengths at such a young age.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because of course he's naturally going to be coming in at first to be a backup to Vitaly Mykolenko for the left back spot. But it's one of those where we're seeing a lot of rave reviews about him. I know it's only Twitter, so I don't take it too much to account. Quite a lot of Bayern fans were actually reasonably upset about the club letting him go. And then there's some interesting stuff about his stuff for Real Valladolid, that I'll mention a little bit later. But do you think it's going to be one where he can come in straight away and start over someone like Mykolenko, who is a bit back and forth with Everton fans? A lot of Everton fans think he doesn't really have much in terms of going forward, mainly defensive fullback, which is naturally almost being phased out of football nowadays. I feel like fullbacks need to be able to do a little bit of everything. Do you think he's one of those where he has enough talent where he could come in and after a good pre-season he could straight away go, this is my spot, or do you think it'll take him a little bit of time to adapt to the more physical nature of the Premier League?
I'd like to say the former, but it wouldn't be a surprise if it does take him time to physically get up to speed with the Prem. Sadly, from a Bundesliga perspective, we've seen lots of talented players come over the pond and be excellent Bundesliga level players, and they've struggled for whatever reason. In the Premier League, Jadon Sancho, Kai Havertz being names straight away that the high profile players that have done it. So if Aznou can kind of come under the radar, have a half decent preseason, and then not get too much attention, so to speak, it might suit him a bit better, and then he might get some minutes, and yeah, maybe take the spot that Mykolenko essentially has, as you said, defensive minded players. Maybe something that the game is now kind of phasing out.
Yeah, and I think, like I mentioned, we're seeing, like I said, a lot from Bayern fans, even from some Barcelona fans, saying that there's a lot of not hype around him because I don't think he'd be joining Everton if there were loads of hype around him, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. But it's one of those where there seems to be a lot of talk around him that he has quite a lot of potential. Naturally, you've seen the fullbacks that Barcelona have rolled out. They had Jordi Alba for a long time. They, of course, did bad for Valencia, but Alejandro Balde, who's just come through and really cemented himself this season. And I feel like naturally, these Barcelona products are very, very good attacking, very good with the ball at the feet. But then you've got the Bayern Academy as well, which is known for, I can't say I'm an expert on this, but producing very solid players in terms of they can come in right away and they're ready for the level when they are given a chance. It's one of the best clubs in the world, one of the best institutes in the world. So do you think it's one where that potential is valid from what you have seen so far, or do you think it's one where it's maybe just a little bit of, okay, you've played for these two massive clubs, so we're bumping you up a little bit?
Probably a bit of both. I think, like the Bundesliga, often tries to promote, young players in itself. A lot of clubs are really good at it. Some better than others. From Bayern's point of view, certainly in recent seasons, I suppose if you exclude the anomaly that is Jamal Musiala, who is just this world class, unbelievable player already, the chances that younger players at Bayern has been few and far between, and a lot of them have been loaned out, and a lot of them have been sold on. So that's one thing you probably want to see a bit more if you're a Bayern fan, and I can understand the frustration and potentially around a player like Aznou, being moved on, the money involved is quite interesting, which we might talk about in a bit as well. But yeah, I think it's valid that a player comes through La Masia and is well. And the other thing is to say that the player, Vincent Company, Max Erbel, have all spoken about him really well. So there's no issue around the personality, it seems, or anything like that. So, there's a lot of positivity around him. So it stands to reason that, if he approaches things well at Everton, that he could have a successful time.
Yeah, and as mentioned on February, in February, he went out on loan to Real Valladolid. And I think one thing that interested me most, because he only played, I think it was around 13 games, and not all of those were starts. But I think one thing that interested me most is from everything I read, it was a really good attacking fullback, really good going forward, what you'd expect from a La Masia product. And then when I actually looked at the little floor charts, little bar, everything that was going around about him, he ranked first in five major defensive categories in all of La Liga for any left back. So I think the thing that interests me, and is it a thing where, if from what you've seen of him, is it a thing where he was just paying for the worst team in the league, so he had to defend more? Stats are going to be naturally a little bit more inflated. You look at the example I use is someone maybe like a James Tarkowski with his clearances with us under Dyche. Naturally, playing under someone like Sean Dyche, you're going to just whack the ball away a little bit more. Is it a thing where he is this well rounded already from such a limited experience, or is it a case of, okay, let's relax a little bit here? Valladolid barely have the ball. He's, we know what wingers are like in La Liga, how many talented right wingers there are, especially in that league. So he's going
Mm.
to be constantly faced with one-on-ones. Is it a thing where it is more now actually? Those numbers may be a little bit inflated. Let's hold up a little bit here. We haven't just signed the next, generational left back.
I think it would have been a culture shock for him, which is not a bad thing in terms of the football that Valladolid would have been playing or not playing. Obviously, they had a really troublesome season in La Liga just gone, and as you've correctly said, they wouldn't have had the ball much. Negative experiences in terms of the score lines that he would have been involved in, as you said, some as a starter, some as not. So again, with the two teams that he's been involved with, Bayern and Barca, a lot of what he would have experienced in the youth setups, as well, obviously being taught the same way how to play football, would be a lot of possession based, encouraging to get forward and create scenarios positively and get assists and goals. Obviously, goals are one thing that aren't really a part of his game just yet, which is definitely another work on if we're talking about work ons. But there's definitely something to his game that kind of talks about being able to get assists and be creative. So yeah, might be one not to look into too much just yet. And naturally, his defensive ability will be tested as and when he gets a chance in the Prem as well, of course. With such high quality talent that, that sits in the Prem, which is great to watch, and he'll be tested accordingly. And be a great education for him from a footballing point of view.
Yeah, and you mentioned the player comparison being Rafa Guerreiro, who maybe I can imagine a lot of fans are familiar with, but are not dead certain on the type of player he is. Is there a player you could compare him to in the Premier League, past or present, to be honest, who you think that's the closest comparison to someone like an Aznou?
That's a good question. In terms of a player that I could maybe compare him to, let's have a think. Doobie doos. I mean, I suppose mm, 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 I don't want to put too much pressure on him. No, I'm not going to compare him to him. I think, yeah, Guerrero as a player, just to give more context, I guess, is just a player who's super comfortable on the ball, very, very technical, a player who's played, at Bayern and Dortmund in his career so far. So, yeah, that technical ability, I think, is just one that is just super confident on the ball. again, the past or present Premier League is a tricky one for me because again, he's had such little first team exposure. I wouldn't want to necessarily tag him with anything just yet because who's saying what player he might eventually turn into? But that they're the noises that are coming out of people in the know in Germany and across Bundesliga football. And yeah, I think that's the safest bet. It might mean a couple of Google searches for you Everton fans if you're not as familiar with the Bundesliga player Guerrero. Obviously, he's in competition there as well with Alphonso Davies. Not fair probably to link him in that sense because I don't know the player in terms of how quick he is. Obviously, Davies is a very direct player and gets forward all the time. So yeah, bit of a mix of those kind of typical Spanish technical fullback who is looking to start a career in the Prem, which would be really interesting to see how he gets on.
Yeah, I think I had the same problem as you as when I had to report him on the first news video, especially when that chart came out of all his stats and stuff like
Mm.
that. Then watching a few highlight clips trying to not get too excited about him. I think unfortunately for me, the first one that came into my mind was Cancelo, but I was like, I don't want to say that because it will get me slaughtered if he's crap. And because of but I think the thing I thought, and it's not a specific player, and I don't know how you think about this, but I think the thing that just came to my mind immediately was a Man City fullback. So
Yeah,
similar to someone
yeah.
like a Rico Lewis, basically that role of being able to get the ball, come into midfield, do a lot with it. I think it's one of those where, again, like you said, it's hard to put a player comparison onto someone who's so young with such limited football, even if that limited football did look good. I mean, standing out in a really bad team's difficult, especially as a defender. But I
Yeah.
think it's one of those where it seems to be a bit of a odd scenario all around, really, in terms of that, how quick it developed, how I don't know where it came from, how Asno is, clearly not someone who's massively well known across the footballing landscape. So it's one of those where this is clear that this is a specific player Everton had their eye on, and as soon
Mm,
as they saw the chance, they pounced on it.
yeah.
Is there anything else you know about Asno in terms of maybe what people from Bayern have said, in terms of what the initial overall feeling around him was when it comes to, because again, this came so suddenly. It was one report from Bild, and then all of a sudden, 2 hours later, Romano was reporting that it was done. So it's one of those. Is there anything to add on that hasn't been said yet about the player, just in general, really?
Well, I think we've covered his strengths and a couple of his weaknesses, I guess. Not much to kind of note in terms of his physicality. He's, for 19, he's probably your average height. I think he's about 5'8", 5'9". So not a massive issue considering he's a fullback. We've already kind of noted the kind of personality and how well thought of the likes of Bayern head coach Vincent Company has praised him and his time back in Spain. Um, I guess another thing to note is the fact that yes, he was Spanish by birth, but through his parents qualified to play for the Morocco national team. So he worked his way through that setup and has now since made three first team full caps for that for Morocco, even getting one assist in one of those games. So maybe that speaks about the player in terms of just not wanting to follow a path that he feels is blocked. Like with the Spanish national team. And then same goes to be said about if he feels that his time in Bayern needs to be cut short because that's being blocked by Guerrero and Alphonso Davies being in front of him, then it stands to speak about the character of him that he just wants to play football and therefore try and get a move accordingly. Again, we mentioned his contract a little bit earlier that it runs out next year, summer of 2026. So obviously just about a year to run on that. So that I guess that's interesting to think about from his point of view and from Bayern's point of view. I guess a decision had to be made whether to extend or to let something like this happen to try and generate some funds. It's no secret that Bayern have been desperately working in the transfer market to get a couple of high profile signings, which a lot of them have fallen flat. So whether it's about revenue generating, I'm not overly sure because Bayern is such a well run establishment and never really shy of a few pounds. So there's not loads to add. I just think this is one where opportunity presented itself, as you mentioned, and Everton have seen a chance and they've gone for it. And yeah, whether these are the sort of signings that either just peter out sadly and you never hear of him again, which would be very sad, or it's one of those that you look back on and you say, well, 9 million euros plus add-ons, what obviously has been reported, what a fabulous deal that was. So I guess time will tell, but there's certainly rightly a good amount of excitement around him.
Yeah, and the last question really is, do you think this will be a good deal for Everton overall?
At the moment, his transfer market value is around 4 million euros. So I guess if the deal goes through at what's reported at 9 million euros, so that's roughly about 7.75 mil, give or take, plus a few add-ons. For a young player who's yet to, well, has a great deal of promise. I think it's a good deal for both. I think it's a decent deal for both. I think Bayern get what they want, a bit of money generated for them. Everton get a player that can rightly competes with Mykolenko ahead of the season, and you've got those contrasting fullbacks, like you said, Callum, in terms of Mykolenko maybe being more defensive, that you can work with for this season.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That is all for this video. If you did enjoy, please make sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Everton Newsfeed and make sure to follow Rory on Twitter, which will all be linked below. Check out all Rory's content that he does. And we will see you all for the next video and our live stream that I am on.